Hello, my name is Rick Houston, and welcome to the Scene Vault Podcast, your source for all things NASCAR history. Presented by Las Vegas Motor Speedway, America's racing showplace.
When it got time for me to graduate high school, I didn't go to college. Like, the garage area was my college. So I tell people, even to this day, I've been to 3 World Fairs and 2 goat fucking. There's not a lot I haven't seen.
You were working with Ricky at the 5-car when the accident happened with Mike Rich.
Yes.
In Atlanta.
Yeah, I was on the pit crew.
What do you remember about that day?
It was tough. So for my friends that are still, they believe, captive in the sport, guys, girls, you have talents far beyond what corporate America has, and they need you.
The day NASCAR and all of us associated in any way with NASCAR forget its past, that's the day we don't have any future.
Just to get started with, your dad raced out in California. How did y'all wind up out here in North Carolina?
Yeah, so I'm from a little town called Portville, and there's about 7 people. Dick Brooks, DK Ulrich, everyone remembers Toucan, Marv Adkins. There was a whole group from Portville that raced in the local area, Fresno, Bakersfield, those type places. And I think DK was the first one that decided to come out here. And there's a whole story. I don't want to get into DK's story, but there's a story out there that DK tells about where, they built this car in one of the garages there in Portville, and they were going to come out here and race, and the vehicle broke down. And, there's stories about stealing water pumps off fire trucks. And those of you that know DK Ulrich, he is still today quite the character.
Well, we've had him on the show. So quite the character. I don't think you're giving him enough credit. I don't think you're giving him enough credit at all.
Yeah.
So once you got out here, about how old were you when you were?
I was 12 years old.
Okay.
And so the interesting part of that is you couldn't get a garage pass, or you couldn't get a license at that age back then. So to get in the garage area, what would happen is they were little paper colored passes that we used to have. So I had construction paper of different colors, right? And we would cut. This is no joke now. We would cut this construction paper, right, to match the color of the pass, right? And when you walk in, all you got to do is flash the pass. So for multiple years of my career, which I really don't even count those years, is I would get in the garage area with construction paper of different colors.
Now, how did you make sure you had the right color on any given week?
Because we would go to a little shack to get passes, right? Uh-huh. I would stay in the vehicle, and they would come out and say, it's blue, it's green, it's yellow, it's orange, it's right? And we would cut those, and that would be my pass to get in. And it was funny because after I was old enough to get a license, a NASCAR license, they all were like, you're just now old enough to get a license, but you've been doing this for a long time. How'd you get in? And
never mind.
And the question was never asked, right? So don't ask, don't tell, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, when you were getting into the garage with your construction paper credentials, what were you doing once you got into the garage?
So back in that day, I was what was called the gopher.
Yeah.
Right. Go for this, go for that. Right?
Still called that.
Right. And so I was the grunt. And I'm blessed to have been mentored by so many talented people over the years. I could tell stories about Elmo Langley and and Dick Brooks, and just so many different people that probably weren't very prominent in the sport, but were very influential in everything that they did, and were truly reflected in developing me into who I am today.
Now, that's why you're here, is to tell stories about Elmo Langley and Dick Brooks and DK Ulrich. So fire away, man. I've got all day.
Oh, Lord, I don't even know where to start.
Now, wait a sec. On second thought, you were 12, 13, 14 years old getting into the garage. What kind of stories can you tell about DK Ulrich?
Well,
because the kind of stories that DK Ulrich told might not necessarily jibe with a 12, 13, 14-year-old being in the garage.
Yeah.
If you know what I'm saying.
Well, I've got interesting stories because in a high school program, and this isn't about DK, this is about Lake Speed, right? Who, I owe a lot to in my career. Lake is an outstanding gentleman, super Christian. But before he was a Christian, right, and before he married Risa, he was a normal guy like the rest of us, right? So I can remember being in Dover, Delaware, and I was 16 years old, and drinking rum and Coke at the bar that was purchased by Lake Speed at the bar.
For you.
For me.
Lake Speed.
But that was before he was a Christian. And, I remember that very distinctly, enjoying a drink with the guys and being 16 years old.
So you got your foot in the door with DK. How long did it take for you to get the sense that this was going to be your career for the foreseeable future? Or did you already know it then?
No, I didn't. Right. So I really didn't understand what motorsports truly was at that particular point in my life. We were in California at a race, and my dad came to me in Riverside with another gentleman that was on the race team, and he's like, I think I'm done. I'm going to go home, get your stuff, we're going. And I just stood there. And the friend said, hey, my dad's name was Irv. He goes, Irv, I think Troy needs to stay. And at that time, I think I was 15 years old, 14 or 15. And he goes, my dad looked at me and goes, you're a man, you stay. And I think I was making like $325 a week back then, right? And it was during the summer, right? So I would get out of school. Someone would drop me at the race shop. I would work, clean wheels, bust down tires, work in the body shop. I mean, I worked my way through the whole system.
Now,
right?
Was this DK or
this was at DK's deal, right?
Yeah.
And my dad left the sport and followed other careers. I stayed in the sport and then worked in a high school program and went to work for Lake Speed. Daryl Derringer was the team manager back then. And Lake was an independent team, and went there after school and went to the racetrack on the weekends and worked after school in that program. And then, progressively, when it got time for me to graduate high school, I didn't go to college. Like, the garage area was my college, and quite the college it was. It was truly the education that's got me to where I am today, and I wouldn't change a thing about it.
So if your dad is back in California and you're here and 15, 16 years old, who were you staying with?
No. We were in California when he decided to quit. And then he went back to North Carolina to where we lived. And I stayed at the racetrack with the race team.
Okay. All right.
It was called the Turnaround back then. So we would go to College Station, Texas, Riverside, California, and then to Michigan to come back, and it was called the turnaround. From time to time, we would, go to Juarez, right?
Did you go to Juarez with David Ift?
So let's tell the story. Right? So I'm 13 years old, right? And I even tell this. I tell this story to a lot of people, and it's kind of funny. My sex education comes from Juarez, Mexico, right? And Dick May, if y'all remember Dick May, right?
The mayor of the Apollo restaurant.
Yeah.
The mayor of Concord.
So we were in Juarez, Mexico, me as a young man, right? My sex education came from a donkey show in Juarez, Mexico.
You know how I told you before we started recording that we could talk about anything? I believe that's about as far as we need to go.
It don't get any better than that. So I tell people, even to this day, I've been to 3 World Fairs and 2 goat fuckings, and there's not a lot I haven't seen.
Well, that's the first time that phrase has ever been used on this podcast, and I don't bleep stuff out either. So you're moving up.
Yep.
You sneak into the garage as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
You get old enough. You come of age. You're now legit.
Yes.
Crew member. How long did you stay with Lake before making that next step?
So I ended up going to work at Hendrick Motorsports under Waddell Wilson.
What year?
Oh, God, that would have been 89 or 90, right in that time.
Now, had you stayed with Lake the entire 80s?
No, so I moved around with a couple other teams there, younger teams, and ended up at Hendrick Motorsports. And that's really when transition started to take place, right? So through the Hendrick Motorsport era of the 5-car, Waddell had left for a number of reasons, but Waddell left, and the team started disintegrating. I was the last employee of the 5-car to leave when Gary Dehart took it over. Went over to Darrell Waltrip's that very same day. You just load your toolbox and go to the next place.
Darrell Waltrip's Darwall?
Darwall.
Okay, yeah.
17 car,
yeah.
Right? And at that time, I was a body hanger, right? So I was hanging bodies. And my wife and I were, we weren't married at the time. I had asked her for her hand in marriage. And we were doing a program at the church for the youth. And Risa Speed walked through the door. And Risa was there to tell her testimony about Christ and some things that happened to her as a young person and to help the youth there. And she looked at me and she goes, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm at Darrell's now, and this is my fiance. We're going to get married." And she goes, "You need to go talk to Lake." And I was like, "Really?" She goes, "Go talk to Lake. He'd love to see you." So I showed up at Lake's place, and he basically had a garage in his backyard. And it wasn't the garage most people think. It was a race shop, right? And so we got into a conversation, and he's like, "Dude, come over here. Come back to work for me." So I went back to work for Lake, and I was there about 2 weeks. And he approached me in the shop, and he said, "Why are you not a crew chief?" And I kind of laughed, and I said, "Because I'm not." And Lake said, "Listen, I've worked with a lot of people in my career." He goes, "I've never witnessed what I've witnessed you here today with leadership and everything you know about a car and geometry and all the different facets of what's going on." He goes, "Would you be my crew chief?" I said, "Like, you got one. You got a crew chief. You don't need one." And he's like, "You need to be my crew chief." And that was the Purex days, the 83 car. And we only ran a limited schedule. but we almost won every race we were in.
Yeah.
And I credit that to the people that I surrounded myself with. So I learned at a very young age in the sport, it's about the people, right? Know what you know. More importantly, know what you don't know, and surround yourself with people that are stronger in areas that you're weak. And because I was brought up through the education system, through VICA, Vocational Industrial Clubs of America, I always seeked out people in the sport, or excuse me, not in the sport, that really needed that opportunity and had those talents. And I brought those people into the sport where those people thrived and went so much further than I did. And I think that's what maybe I'm proud of, is the people that worked with me and I worked with them that moved on to do bigger and better things than what I even did.
You were working. I don't want to get too far into the Lake Speed, the second Lake Speed years.
Right.
But I do. You had mentioned some things I did want to ask about earlier. You were working with Ricky at the 5-car when the accident happened with Mike Rich.
Yes.
In Atlanta.
Yeah, I was on the pit crew.
What do you remember about that day?
It was tough. Tough. I don't know if I can talk about it.
Okay. I don't want to press you on it. So if you're not comfortable, that's fine.
It was very powerful. I can tell you that.
I know Alan was on one side of Bill. Were you guys the next stall?
No, we were the stall before him.
Okay.
And when Ricky came down pit road, car turned around. Everybody scrambled, and basically the car backed over tire carrier, tire changer, got the jack man pretty good, and then we had to lift the car off Mike.
Okay. I don't know exactly the connection, but you mentioned that out of that came a patent for some kind of umbrella.
So we left the racetrack, and it was somber.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So when we left the racetrack, we went by the baseball stadium there in Atlanta. And we're all in the van. I mean, we traveled most of the time in the van. And I looked over at the baseball stadium, and there was someone walking in the rain with an umbrella that opened up into a Braves baseball helmet or a baseball cap. And I said out loud in the van, I said, hey, guys, if anybody ever came up with a helmet umbrella, they'd probably be a millionaire. And they're all like, Selberg, you're crazy with all these ideas. Yeah. And it was because what happened with Mike that pushed me to take that idea on, because when you see something like that happen, you go, do I want to be in this sport the rest of my life? Do I want to risk my life?
Now, what were you doing on the pit crew at the time?
Were
you going over the wall?
I think I was catch can at that time.
Okay.
On that day.
Yeah.
I'd have to think, I was probably the catch can guy at that time.
So how long did it take you to design the umbrella? And, the particular,
so it's.
I'm not up on my umbrella science.
And so I wasn't either, right? But as you look around and you see, friends that are dying in the sport, literally.
Yeah.
You're going, is this something I want to do the rest of my life, right? So read a lot of books about entrepreneurship and, how to develop products. And that's what we did every day. I mean, what most people miss in NASCAR auto racing is we couldn't go to the store and buy stuff. Like, we had to make it. So you had to think it up, and then you had to make it. So I went to the store, bought some umbrellas, took them apart, cut them up. You know, I was a fabricator, body hanger, cut them up and made them look like a helmet. And then I went to the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. It was very small at that time. And I walked in and I said, I'm looking for a Thomas Registry. And back then, Thomas Registry was like our Bible in the race shop.
Yeah.
Like, we needed fasteners or we needed a widget. We would go to these books. There was no internet, right? We'd go to the book and go, hey, let's find something that we can use as a fastener. Many of the things were aircraft. And it told who the manufacturer was, where to get it, phone numbers, where to call. And the lady brought me to the Thomas Registries, and I said, no, I need umbrella manufacturers. And she said, oh, you need the $1 Million Directory. And she took me to another series of books, and she kind of went, this is the reference library. And then she took me to another room, and she goes, and these are the books. And it was truly every product made in the world. And there was a small group in New York City. There was one guy in Atlanta, and the rest of the people were overseas. So I got, calling people. And so at night, I would call Taiwan or Japan, and people would answer the phone.
Yeah.
And I would go, I'm calling from the United States. And they'd go, and nobody would say anything, right? And finally, I called Hong Kong, and the guy answered the phone, right? And I said, hey, I'm calling from the United States. And he goes, yeah, man, what can I help you with? And I said, I've got an umbrella. I want to see if you can manufacture it. And he said, absolutely. Let me give you my FedEx number, and you send the blueprints over, and we'll take a look at it. Well, at that time, I didn't have blueprints. So Chuck Mack, who was a designer at the time at Hendrick Motorsports, designed many of the paint schemes on the race cars. I took him my umbrella, and I said, hey, Chuck, I need you to draw this up for me. And he looked at it, and he looked at me, and he goes, do you have a patent on this? And I was like, what? He goes, dude, you need to get a patent. And I reached out to a patent attorney, started that process. It was a few-year process, and I'll never forget it. It was a $10,000 deal back then. Today, it's not. But back then...
So you had to pay $10,000 to get the patent? It
was $10,400 is what it cost me for that patent.
Wow.
And I ended up getting it patented, ended up getting it manufactured. First order was 50,000 umbrellas from R.J. Reynolds. I'll never forget it. And,
wow.
And that was not the start for me leaving motorsports. That was the start of me understanding motorsports in a different way. So most of us look at it as cars going in a circle. And that's the result.
Yeah.
Right? The skills that we learn in motorsports and the mindset of solving problems is truly what we learned in motorsports. And that talent can be used anywhere in the world in any discipline. So for my friends that are still, they believe, captive in the sport, guys, girls, you have talents far beyond what corporate America has, and they need you, because what we learn in NASCAR auto racing is how to solve problems in a different way. And sometimes it's cheating.
We'll get to that. I don't want to over dramatize it. I don't want to belabor the point. Today, you are involved in a lot of different things as an entrepreneur, as a coach, as a speaker. Can you trace it back to that day?
Absolutely, in motorsports and everything.
I'm talking about that day in Atlanta.
Oh yeah.
Now, had you done anything like that before?
No.
Okay. Because you mentioned the guy saying, you're always coming up with these kinds of ideas. Maybe you come up with them and just hadn't acted on them.
Everyone does.
Yeah.
Right? The difference between successful entrepreneurs and unsuccessful entrepreneurs, successful ones have failed more times than they succeeded because they've actually tried. So because you come up with the idea and you never execute it, that doesn't make you an entrepreneur. That makes you an idealist.
Yeah.
Right? So you need to make that effort